Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen with you. My name is Jennifer Seale. I am a speech language pathologist, and I work here at the Weissman Center. I'm the AAC program director, and every day I get to talk about AAC is a good day. So thanks for joining me this morning to let me talk with you about AAC and some fundamentals related to autism. I will try to make sure we leave some time at the end for you to ask questions. And I have a little agenda for us today to hopefully keep me on track because I can talk about AAC for a lot longer than 20 minutes. But today I'm hoping for us to talk about what AAC is. And there are a few myths that I'm hoping for us to debunk together today. And then we'll talk about AAC and communication, or ASD and communication, excuse me, and how we can implement AAC at home and what we can be doing to prepare while we're waiting for an AAC evaluation. I will have some updates on the new research related to some of the myths that we know about augmentative and alternative communication to be not true. And if any of you are feeling, I can't actually see the screen for the chat box just yet, but I will be implementing this later. So if any of you are feeling extra alert this morning and want to contribute or participate, think about the last thing that you said right before you came into this meeting and type that into the chat for me, as long as it's not too personal. And if you don't feel like typing it publicly into the chat, write it down for yourself so that we can revisit that in a few minutes here. And then I'm, of course, going to also provide some resources that will provide you additional information. And I know my contact information flipped right in front of you very quickly. The contact information will be at the end of today's session as well. And I definitely encourage you to reach out to me if you want to have continued discussions around AAC and autism. And I am going to be using person-first language today, just because that's the structure of today's talk that I've put together. So first, I like to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, augmentative and alternative communication, and we call it AAC for short because that is a mouthful. I pulled this definition, I pulled some highlights of the definition from the American Speech and Hearing Association so that we know we're sharing an understanding of what AAC is. It's an area of specialized clinical practice that targets individuals who have impairments with speech and language production, so getting information out, and or comprehension, so getting information in. And people with autism can have difficulty with one or both of those areas. It falls under a broader category of assistive technology, and it's essentially assistive technology for communication that helps to improve individuals' functional daily living. AAC is not just, and in the next slide, we're going to talk about a myth, and I'm just going to foreshadow it here. It's not just high technology computers that talk. It's actually a variety of techniques and tools that we use to help individuals express and understand their thoughts, wants, needs, and feelings or ideas. And some of those techniques and tools can be manual signs, gestures, line drawings, visual schedules, etc. And I always like to start my talks by debunking the myths, because that way, if I run out of time, at least I have begun to address some of the misunderstandings about AAC. So there is a perception in the community at large that AAC is only high technology solution. And that sometimes prevents us from thinking creatively about how we can support communicators who perhaps don't have access to functional speech. And so first, I want to mention that AAC is not just high technology. The reality is that this thing that we're doing today and this thing that we do on a regular basis is an exchange of ideas and information. And high technology computers that talk, or what we call in the field speech generating devices, are just one of many AAC options. Think about the way you're communicating with me today. We have you all muted, so you're using the alternative form to participate, hopefully. As I said, I can't see the chat box, but we also we can communicate through typing, writing, pointing, gestures, body language, facial expressions, objects, and pictures and drawing. And I'm really highlighting this idea of this whole continuum of AAC because I think it makes it more tangible for you to be able to be implementing at home, and you're not having to wait for the expert to decide which computer is potentially going to be best for an individual. Also, for some individuals, computers aren't necessary. And I think it's really important to recognize that one form of communication is not better than the other. and that we need to accept all forms of communication that individuals are giving to us. I'm a strong proponent of multimodal communication. We all do it every day, and we should be working to establish access to that type of communication for our individuals with autism as well.
Jen, sorry, I'm going to pop in for 1 second. The interpreters are asking if you can slow down just a little.
Yep, I figured you might have to interrupt me, Clark. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Yeah, I'll definitely, I get excited when I talk about AAC, which ends up having me talk entirely too fast. So mythbuster number 1, AAC is more than just high technology. There's a lot more tools that we can put in place for individuals to give them access to communication that doesn't involve speech. Staying in the realm of high technology is the second myth that I want us to dispel today. And I've now been in the field long enough to remember a time before iPads were an AAC tool. And now we have this, there is a public perception that potentially an iPad is the same thing as other high technology AAC solutions or other computers that talk. And there's also the perception that these iPads are available at a cheaper cost, and they're available without the wait for accessing the professional who can provide insight into the best AAC solutions. I think it's really important to acknowledge today that there are actual practical and functional differences between speech generating devices that are considered durable medical equipment, which means they are funded by insurance, Medicare, and Medicaid, and iPads that have been reappropriated to be used as speech generating devices. Both options are viable, but it's important to recognize that when we're making decisions about maybe just buying an iPad because it's cheaper, that might not necessarily be the best solution for some individuals. Some of the differences that exist between these iPads used as AAC and speech generating devices that were designed specifically for the purposes of AAC can include things like product warranty, can include things like how someone's going to use a device, so accessibility and technology support that's available. Additionally, language that's available on iPads, some of that software doesn't have research backing the development of some of that language, whereas all of the speech generating devices provided by the major manufacturers who qualify as durable medical equipment do have well-established language softwares that have been around for the better part of 25 or 30 years. Additionally, the cheaper cost impacts features that are available on a device. So voices that might be available on an iPad may not be as robust as the ones that are available on speech generating devices. Okay, and then the third myth that I think is a really important one is this perception that I don't want to introduce AAC because it will prevent an individual from learning to talk. And this is, I think, an artifact of us not knowing necessarily how people develop speech and language in conjunction with learning to use external modes of communication. If you take one thing away from me today, please know that AAC does not prevent speech development. The research that we have now has looked at systematic reviews over the last 20 and 30 years, and we're finding that actually the AAC introduction to individuals who don't have speech may actually improve some speech development. Results indicate that, but there needs to be further evaluation. And at the minimum, we know that AAC doesn't impede speech production. And I always like to give this analogy of like, if you are in traffic and you notice that there's a lane to the left that's going faster, which lane are you really trying to get into? And it's the same thing that's going to be happening for our individuals with autism. If they're going to develop speech, they're going to choose to use speech because it's faster and more efficient. And the reality is sometimes individuals with autism have access to speech, and sometimes the environment or the nature of their day impedes their ability to use that speech. So sometimes we need to have access to both forms of communication. And a really important point is if we wait to introduce AAC to an individual because we're waiting to see if they're developing speech because we think it might deter them from developing speech. We're actually limiting their access to language. And so what AAC can do is provide access to language and opportunities for language play and language development that without this external tool for communication, children with autism or individuals with autism might not have access to. Okay, so those are my 3 myths that I wanted to make sure that we talked about today. AAC is not just high technology. iPads are not the same as speech generating devices, and AAC will not prevent speech development. So a little bit about what we know about autism spectrum disorders and communication. We know that autism spectrum disorders can have a range of symptoms that impact communication. And sometimes the communication and language impairment for children with autism or individuals with autism can often be the most devastating aspect of the disorder and ultimately impact people far into adulthood by limiting access to peer relationships. Some of the aspects of communication that tie into augmentative alternative communication and how we can support language development and communication is that we know individuals with autism can have delays in the development of spoken language. We know that they can have impairments in recognizing the appropriateness of functional, verbal, and nonverbal behaviors. And we know that some individuals with autism have impaired social, emotional skills and can sometimes have trouble understanding feelings or perceiving other individuals' feelings. And AAC is a tool that can help make some of these abstract concepts more concrete for individuals with autism. And so another note that we have about individuals with autism is communication is, and this is true for everybody with communication impairments, with limited communication skills, we find that individuals develop unconventional, undesirable, or ineffective behaviors for communication. And I have a behavior soapbox that I'm not going to get on today because I don't have enough time. But I come from the school of thinking that all behaviors are a form of communication. Sometimes that communication is an avoidance tactic, but as a speech language pathologist, I find that my job is to figure out what the behavior is communicating and then help the individuals find more effective ways to get their point across to the larger community who maybe is looking for more conventional means of communicating information. And we do that by augmenting existing communication. So augmenting right now, if you were to imagine this being a podcast, you would probably be attending even less than we potentially are now. And so what we're doing now is I have my video on so you can see me. I've got myself standing up. I've got this PowerPoint with me. I'm augmenting my communication message to you. And I just like to point out that we use these tools as mouth speakers ourselves. And so thinking about that is helpful. And then for folks who have non-functional communication behaviors, we provide alternative methods for communicating those behaviors. So rather than having a tantrum because you need a break, we give you a card, a picture card, or a communication device that helps you communicate that you need a break. And then we don't have to expel so much energy to get to that breaking point. With AAC tools, it's not just about communication, it's actually about helping individuals learn the expectations for communication and learning that communication is built on this notion of turn taking, learning that there are symbols or objects in our environment that can help us get our point across more effectively, because it may be hard for unfamiliar communication partners to determine if the undesirable behavior is because you need to go to the bathroom or because you want to be watching Coco Melon, but having bathroom and Coco Melon's messages would be more effective at getting that point across. And also we can use AAC to help individuals to communicate social affective signals. So things like I'm anxious, I'm happy, and I don't feel well. I also want to mention that AAC isn't just about getting information out. I foreshadowed this a little bit earlier. It's also about getting information in. So many of you perhaps have heard of things called visual schedules to help individuals know what's being expected of them and how many things are ahead of them before they get to be done with the therapy session is what comes to mind for me. And also AAC gives opportunity to practice language. So without speech, we don't actually give someone, if somebody has significantly impaired speech and language, if we don't provide AAC tools, they don't have an opportunity to practice this thing called communication with each other. So that's a little overview about what we know and how AAC can help. And I thought that since we're talking to the community today, I wanted to make sure I talked about what we can do at home. And I wanted to just talk about some language that we use in speech language pathology and really bring it out of the specialized language that we use. So essentially at home, what you can do is begin to provide access or establish access to what we call in speech language pathology core and fringe vocabulary. And this is the part where at the beginning of my talk, I asked you if you wanted to participate to give me an idea of the last thing that you said. And I'm going to switch over to my view of that in a second. But first, I want to talk about core vocabulary. The majority of what we communicate in a day can be encompassed in about 300 words or less. Core vocabulary can be used across environments. So it's a non-specific language, he, she, they, our. So I've given you the English, the pronouns, verbs, prepositions, and adjectives. And the core vocabulary is really important because I can get opportunities to practice language across environments. Fringe vocabulary is that more specific vocabulary that really only is used in a particular environment or context or activity. And finding the balance between having access to core and fringe is important. So fringe vocabulary is the motivating thing that people want to talk about. When I started talking to you today, I said, any day I get to talk about AAC is a good day. And that's because I get to stay in my nerdy niche fringe vocabulary about augmentative and alternative communication. An example of fringe vocabulary could be things like wind chill. We don't talk about wind chill in Florida. We talk about wind chill up here in Wisconsin and some of our other northern states. I'm just going to pop over and see what I can see in our chat, maybe. And I need another screen essentially. Well, so I'm not going to be able to find this in a timely fashion, but I do have an example of what I said right before I jumped into this talk, and I was talking to my cat because I live with a cat, and I said, I love you so much. And all of those words are core vocabulary. There's nothing for fringe around that. If I said, I love you so much, Jackson, that Jackson piece is fringe vocabulary. And I did see a bunch of questions in the chat box, so we'll get to those. I have 2 more slides. So in thinking about providing access to core and fringe vocabulary, you don't need to print off cards. You can use actual objects. So if somebody really likes Cheez-Its, you can use the Cheez-It wrapper and have them use the Cheez-It wrapper to communicate with you. If somebody really likes Coco Melon, and I don't know if people have DVDs anymore, but if they have the DVD case, they can bring that to you. And that's really getting practice using external things to communicate with, or pointing to which outfit someone wants to wear in a day. Things that we can do at home are really, what I have on this slide are outlining some language development anchor points, people who are pre-linguistic. So we can think about when people are early language communicators, we want to notice that they're attempting to communicate and we want to respond. We want to, if we see someone's upset, we want to notice, oh, your body language is telling me that you're really upset, and I understand that. What I'm not understanding is what is making you upset, or what I can do to make you happy or less upset. Once we have someone who has a little bit more communication and they have some access to emerging language, we want to increase the experiences with a variety of communication functions. And again, if you think about what you said right before you jumped into this session, what you said was probably not just a labeling or a request, unless you were asking for someone to bring you some coffee in the morning. What you said were probably things like declaratives or comments. And I think with folks with autism and most of the people with AAC, as we're thinking about early language development, we get stuck in the land of requesting or labeling, and we don't want to do that. And then supporting individuals to understand that conversation has turns and having them do those turns for more than one time is an important tool. Also, I'm just going to put a plug in for literacy. If we're reading books to kids at home, we're beginning to lay some foundations for literacy development, which as we get older, literacy is the ultimate goal for communicators. It gives us the least dependence on other people guessing what we're communicating or wanting to say to other individuals. And I know this is a little bit of a whirlwind today, but I wanted to make sure I hit some high points in terms of making sure we know that AAC is not just high technology. iPads are not the same thing as durable medical equipment, speech generating devices. AAC does not deter speech development. And I wanted to give you some things to think about to work with at home. I have some references. I know they're tiny, and I think that you're going to get this PowerPoint with these links, and they're hyperlinks, so you should be able to just click on them after today's session. I pulled some resources that are specific to Wisconsin, and there are some really great resources in terms of accessing assistive technology, accessing learning opportunities about what AAC is, and two of those projects are the AT Forward project for professionals who have attended today. Go check that out. They're doing some really cool stuff in terms of getting you information about how to support students who have AAC needs. I'm also going to put a shameless plug in for our ECHO AAC here at the Weisman Center. We have 3 really great speakers, internationally renowned leaders in the field of AAC coming to talk to us this spring. Check out that website to find those dates, or we can have someone pop those into chat potentially. And then I have some of my favorite general AAC resources that I wanted to share with you. For those of you that are looking where to get started or ideas for activities that can support core and fringe vocabulary, practicalaac.org is a really great website. ASHA, American Speech and Hearing Association, will give you some fundamentals around AAC. And then the 2 Penn State University links that I have here, one is very research oriented, the other is talking about helping build some of that literacy in for individuals. And then I wanted to also give you communication inventory tools, because as parents, you understand your child's communication a lot better than strangers. And if you can start to take an inventory of what someone's able to communicate and begin to sort of establish a dictionary for folks to be able to work with, that's a really helpful foundation to start with. And then because it's a quick talk, I wanted you to have access to a core word list that's available through the AAC Language Lab. The reality is, if you Google core word list, there's a whole bunch of resources that are available to you. And I know I think I'm at 20 minutes, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna open it up for questions at this point. Let's see if I can stop screen sharing.
Jen, thank you so much. We have our robust team of CASC speech language pathologists who have been handling some questions in the chat as they came in. So thanks to Kat Cantor and Sarah Marshall for responding immediately to some of those. And just so everyone knows, we will be sending out the PowerPoint that Jen just gave that had some of those good resources and links. We'll be sending that after the fact, along with the video archives. And also we will work on getting the PowerPoint translated into Spanish so that we can send that out after this as well.
Yeah, thanks Sarah and Kat for jumping in and answering those questions. That's one thing about the AAC team here at Weisman. They sure make me look good. So thank you for that.
So there are a couple questions that I think I will share. One of them is, if a child uses a special or a specific, AAC program on an SGD, do you believe in using those same photo symbols for visuals in the home? Or do you think it's good to mix the symbols up to create more generalization?
That's a great question. And I think it sort of depends on where the communicator is in understanding the meaning of those symbols. So I think if we are early in understanding the meaning of those symbols, it's good to have some consistency across environments in terms of what this symbol means and where it's usable. As we grow into emergent language development or developing language, these are phases of language development, it is good to start to learn about symbol flexibility. So the way that we use words, words are symbols. And so the way that we use words change meaning depending on where they're placed in a sentence. And the same is true for symbols. But I think if you have someone who's early communicating, I think it's okay to keep the symbols consistent across environments. That being said, if that's a barrier because you can't get access to those symbols or you don't have time to print those out because you all are busy, then having something that also represents the same thing at home is preferable than having nothing. And it could be an object or a picture. And that's an excellent question. And I think it actually lends itself to more conversation than what I'm able to provide within time constraints today. But that's my initial answer. And I'm happy to, if you want to email me, I'm happy to chat more about that.
Another question, Jen, is when you say AAC devices are not iPads, do you have other devices you recommend or to show? We've only ever been told to use apps from speech therapists, Touch Chat, Proloqua 2, Go, and LAMP.
Yeah, and so I want to just clarify, AAC are not just iPads. iPads are an AAC tool for sure, and they can be used as an AAC tool. It's just that I want to make sure that we recognize that iPads are not the same as the speech generating devices that are offered by 3 major manufacturers who've been around for 20 years and qualify as durable medical equipment. And those devices are specialized computers. They are similar to tablets. They're heavier by and large, mostly because they have better access. And so the examples of those, and I can type this into the chat perhaps, are like we have devices that come from a company called the Pranky-Romic Company. And the Pranky-Romic Company devices have names like the Accent. We have another company that's called Tobii Dynavox, and they have a whole other list of devices that are available. And so I think that, and you mentioned that you've only been told to use apps on iPads from speech pathologists, and I don't want to undermine apps on iPads. Like they're not a bad thing. I just want to make sure that we know that there are 2 distinct tools and they're not necessarily interchangeable, although they might seem that they are. And so to give, there's also another tablet or another computer that talks, if you will, is called a NovaChat. And then there's like a whole other line of products that are available that are not iPad based. And I'm not sure that entirely answers your question, but iPads are AAC devices. They're just one type of high technology AAC device.